Welcome to 1997. The Nintendo 64 is about to have its breakout year, redefining the first-person shooter genre with one of the best couch multiplayer games of all time. Blizzard is about to completely change the game with Battle.net and its action RPG, and Interplay is introducing the world to Western RPGs. Arcade fighting games had come and gone, and while there were still some solid games pushing interest, home gaming had begun to catch up to the graphics and the experiences that arcades were providing, eating into their market share. People were looking for the next big thing, and the next big jump into the unknown. Square had just started work on Final Fantasy VII in 1994, right after the release of Final Fantasy VI. At the time, the game was planned as another 2D entry for the Super Nintendo, but Squaresoft decided to instead focus on making a 3D game. For a time, they looked at the Nintendo 64, even showing off a tech demo using 3D models of Final Fantasy VI characters, but ultimately, almost everything they wanted to do wouldn't have been possible in the Nintendo 64's hardware. And of course, the space limitations on the console's media would have caused further problems. So in 1997, Squaresoft was about to reveal the real reason why it left Nintendo behind for the PlayStation. They released Final Fantasy VII for the Sony PlayStation, and it was massive. It's hard to overstate how big of a deal Final Fantasy VII was. It was a huge success in Japan, selling more than 2 million copies domestically, and then hitting 500,000 units in the US in fewer than 3 weeks. It brought the JRPG to a larger, more general audience than the genre had ever reached before. Mainstream players who were turned off by the cartoon sprites were suddenly very much on board for the CGI cutscenes, showing Sephiroth summoning a meteor to destroy a planet. The game's story, phenomenal soundtrack, and solid gameplay also helped. But an underrated aspect that really helped it transcend was the characters, and I'd argue that's the #1 reason why Final Fantasy VII is so regarded 27 years later. In the last two videos, we discussed both of the main characters, Cloud and Sephiroth, but today we'll talk about one of my personal favorites, Tifa Lockhart. She gained most of her popularity through the mainline games, spin-offs, and sequels, and was often cited as an example of a strong female character in video games, especially during the era of Lara Croft in the Tomb Raider series. She definitely did something right to be compared to that. Let's talk about why this is and what brought so many fans to fall in love with her 27 years later. Immediately after the release of Final Fantasy VI, the development team was hungry. They wanted to create a larger cast of characters that would appeal to everyone around the world. Tifa, interestingly enough, wasn't present in the early versions of Final Fantasy VII. Initially, the game was only supposed to have 3 playable characters, Cloud, Aerith, and Barret. However, during a phone call to the project director Yoshinori Kitase, it was suggested at some point in the game one of the main characters should die, and after much discussion as to whether it would be Barret or Aerith, the producers chose Aerith. Tetsuya Nomura joked that it was his idea, so that he could introduce Tifa into the game. The team really liked the idea of having 2 heroines and a hero wavering between them. Whichever you choose says a lot about who you got closer to in the game. As for the artwork itself, Tifa was designed to use the monk character class that appeared in previous games in the series. Her clothing resembled that of a fighter, but also your stereotypical feminine character design, which both contrasted each other really well. She's got long hair with big brown eyes along with the miniskirt and the bare midriff, and last but not least, anime tits. Unlike most other characters for Final Fantasy VII, Nomura wrote down her bust, waist, and hip measurements in her concept art for her. He wanted each character to have at least one striking feature, and in Tifa's case, it was her breast. Internally, the development team jokingly referred to her as Boing-chan. Initially, Nomura had difficulty deciding whether to go with the miniskirt or the long pants. Seeking input, he passed his sketches around the outfits and the majority of the staff members approved of the miniskirt design. This additionally served as a contrast to Aerith, whose long skirt was her trademark. The attire was explained as giving her the freedom of movement due to her hand-to-hand combat. With Tifa having such a striking design though, it begs the question of why? The true elephant in the room is, what is the true reason that Tifa has more feminine maternal characteristics compared to her counterpart, Aerith? This is an important question that I want to get into later in the characterization bit, and it's part of the reason why Tifa is often overlooked, but I want to sow it in your heads early. Anyway, we can get back to the important stuff now. Moving on to the artwork of the remake series, the development team worked heavily with Nomura to refine her design, adding details like charms around her wrist and going through 20 different hair colors before settling on ashen brown. Artist Roberto Ferrari created multiple outfit options included in the remake for Tifa, aiming for designs that would be easier on the animation team, but would also pay homage to the outfits in the original game. Various ideas were thrown around during the development for clothing options, including a maid outfit and a bikini modeled after a chocobo. They ultimately settled on a black cheongsam with her hair worn in pigtail buns, as well as a black kimono, both of which are worn with stockings. The childhood and teenage designs were mostly left untouched. In Rebirth, 2 swimsuit options were added for the character, consisting of a blue tied-up shirt and short shorts with her hair in a bun adorned with a flower, and a white and blue bikini with frills in the lower half forming a makeshift miniskirt. Ferrari commented that all these designs were particularly difficult to create, as several of the submissions were rejected during the process. The last design I wanted to talk about before moving on to characterization is her Advent Children outfit. Nomura describes Tifa's character in Advent Children as having several dimensions, calling her like a mother, a sweetheart, and a close ally in battle, not only emotionally but physically as well. In the film, she wears a white tank top with a black zipped up vest, a pink ribbon around her left bicep, and boots. She also wears a black buttoned up shirt that covers up her thighs and wears shorts beneath it. Her hair is depicted shorter as well, and no longer has the dolphin tail end from her original design. All of these alterations arose because the team wanted to display the maturity that transformed the character. With that all being said, let's move on to the aspects of her that make her who she is, a quintessential figure in the Final Fantasy VII universe. Earlier, I mentioned how Tifa's design is synonymous with her role as a character. This is true. She's a woman who has, herself, experienced a terrifying trauma and emotional damage. Her entire town was massacred right in front of her, and her father was murdered by Sephiroth. She develops a justified hatred for Shinra, which in turn drives her to join Avalanche, a group of eco-terrorists that are trying to destroy the reactors, with which the Shinra company are draining the planet of its life source. In the narrative, Tifa's arc is tied closely to the main character Cloud's. She acts more as a mirror to Cloud's development as a character. Where Cloud has to shed his cold, mercenary persona that he upholds to deal with his trauma, Tifa on the other hand has to overcome her trauma by shedding her doubt, uncertainty, and worry for the future, and focuses on her capacity as a leader and caretaker. There's a pivotal moment at Cloud's lowest point where he's been manipulated by Sephiroth to hand over the black materia, dooming the entire planet, then being tossed into the lifestream, having his mind shattered by repeated trauma as well as being exposed to Mako energy. The team finds him in the hospital later on, where he's suffering from Mako poisoning and could hardly function. Tifa decides to stay with Cloud and take care of him. Then through a series of cataclysmic events, the both of them are tossed into the lifestream. Here, Tifa is able to access Cloud's subconscious and begins to piece together his memories and who he is as a person, and more importantly, what happened on that day in Nibelheim. In doing this, she has her own memory of those events confirmed, and she believes strongly in her own capabilities and perception on things. It's important to note that during the time that Cloud isn't a party member, it's Tifa who takes over as the primary party leader. By reconstructing Cloud's character through her empathy and her kindness and through her long-standing emotional connection with him, Tifa fully comes into her own as one of the primary leaders of the team and one of the most important characters in the narrative. It's her empathy and willing to sacrifice herself for the benefit of others that eventually heals Cloud's emotional scars and allows him to become the hero who finally can put an end to Sephiroth and the conflict. So yes, thematically Tifa falls into a lot of stereotypical feminine roles. She's a caretaker and she's an emotional support character, which leads me back into design theory. We could all say that Nomura gave her big tits because he was just horny that day, but I think it's much deeper than that. Large breasts are typically associated with fertility, womanhood, and especially motherhood, nurturing, and caregiving. As we discussed earlier, a lot of Tifa's story is about how she grows through a nurturing relationship with Cloud. As she helps him piece together his identity, she also comes into her own as a caretaker and leader. Not only that, but she's a surrogate mother to Marlene, who's Barrett's daughter, and a surrogate sister to Aerith and Yuffie. To Cloud though, she's the link to his innocence, to his childhood, and his vulnerability. It's her empathy and nurturing spirit that helps put Cloud back together in the end, the one that restores his lost innocence, and in a sense, takes on a motherly role towards him. She also tends to be the person that's constantly pushing Cloud forward to pursue things, joining Avalanche, being the leader of the group, and eventually taking down Sephiroth. She encourages him and again takes on that nurturing role of a mother. This is an important thing to understand about Tifa and her character design. So yes, the tits are being used in a connotation of motherhood, womanhood, nurturing, etc., which is fairly stereotypical. The way it's executed, however, is perfect, and it's part of the reason why so many grew so attached to her. Hopefully this section gave insight on why she may have been overlooked, and how she's integral to the story. Let's move on to her various appearances and how she's represented there. Outside of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, Tifa appears in Kingdom Hearts 2 in her Advent Children attire, searching for Cloud and later fighting various Heartless. She was originally planned to appear in the final mix version of the original Kingdom Hearts, but due to time constraints, the staff members chose to incorporate Sephiroth instead. Now. She also makes a brief appearance in the manga adaptation, searching for Cloud and eventually finding him in Hollow Bastion. In Dissidia, Tifa's a playable character alongside Sephiroth and Cloud. She's featured in her original Final Fantasy outfit, but the player has access to her Advent Children and Nibelheim outfits as well. Since her introduction, Tifa has remained popular, but with that popularity came with being overlooked, due to fans loving the fan servicey parts about her. She happens to be one of the most relatable and realistic characters in gaming. The role she plays in the story is undeniably important, and just like any good character, she makes mistakes and learns from them, growing in the process. This video isn't gonna do her any full justice, so I encourage people to play both the original Final Fantasy VII and the remakes. Both are amazing and they showcase subtle differences for the character. I hope this anatomy sheds some light on the kind of person she is and why she's so beloved. Whether it's her design or her story, she's an important part of the game, and without Tifa, there is no Final Fantasy VII. Anyway, this has been Susie from Artcade, and thanks for watching.